Shalom, family. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Portrait Pioneers of Color. Today, I'm going to do a video here about the beasts in Revelation. Not all of them. We know there's a lot of beasts in Revelation, but just generally, what do beasts mean when they appear in the book of Revelation and in the book of Daniel? So this is just a basic general understanding of what, when you see beasts that show up in Revelation, what do they represent in general? I know that there are a lot of specific things that they apply to, and we're all in search for truth. So I just want to do this, and I'm going to do a couple of other videos to follow up on this as well. But let's just go into this here. We're going to start in Daniel chapter 8, and then we're going to go into Revelation chapter 13 and chapter 17. So with that in mind, if you want to follow along in your copy of the Bible, you're more than welcome. I know many of you do. So let's talk about what are the beasts that are mentioned in the scriptures. Okay, so if we go to book of Daniel, chapter 8, we're going to start from verses 1 down through 7. And let's see what we can learn about the beast that when it applies to prophecy, what they mean. So, verse 1, in the third year of the kingship of Belshazzar, the king, there was a vision that appeared to me, even me, Daniel, after the one appearing to me at the start. And I began to see in the vision, and it came about while I was seeing that I was in Shushan, the castle, which is in Elam, the jurisdictional district, and I proceeded to see in the vision, and I myself happened to be by the watercourse of Ulai. Verse 3, when I raised my eyes and I saw and look, a ram standing before the watercourse, and it had two horns. And the two horns were tall, but the one was taller than the other. And the taller was the one that came up afterward. All right, so let's notice right here, friends, that Daniel saw a vision of a ram that had two horns. Continuing in verse 4, and I saw the ram making thrust to the west and to the north and to the south. And no wild beast kept standing before it, and there was no one doing any delivering out of its hand. And it did according to its will, and it put on great airs. Verse 5, now notice he sees another beast. And I, for my part, kept on considering, and look, there was a male of the goats coming from the sunset upon the surface of the whole earth, and it was not touching the earth. But as regards the he-goat, there was a conspicuous horn between its eyes. All right. And it kept coming all the way to the ram possessing the two horns, which I had seen standing before the watercourse, and it came running toward it in the powerful rage. So we see that Daniel has a vision of two beasts. One is a ram and one is a goat. And then, of course, in verse 7, there appears to be a battle between these two beasts. It says in verse 7, and I saw it coming into close touch with the ram, and it began showing bitterness toward it, and it proceeded to strike down the ram and to break its two horns. And there proved to be no power in the ram to stand before it, so it threw it to the earth and trampled it down, and the ram proved to have no deliver out of his hand. Okay, so let's understand this. What do these beasts mean? Well, if we go read further on into Daniel chapter 8, if we go over to verse 20 and 21, we see here that the prophecy is explained right here on what those beasts meant. Notice in verse 20 and 21, and the ram that you saw possessing the two horns stands for the kings of Media and Persia. And the hairy he-goat stands for the king of Greece. And as for the great horn that was between its eyes, it stands for the first king. And that one having been broken, so that there were four that finally stood up instead of it, there are four kingdoms from his nation that will stand up, but not with his power. Okay, we're not going to go into verse 22 today in this video. we'll break that down later. But we basically are just getting just a general understanding of what beasts mean when they appear in prophecy in Scripture. And so we have a very simple explanation here in verses 20 and 21 in Daniel chapter 8. The ram stood for the kings of Media and Persia, and the ram in verse 20, and then in 21, the he-goat stood for the king of Greece. Okay, so quite simply. So these beasts in Daniel were referring to political kingdoms. They were referring to political military kingdoms, these beasts. So now let's go over to Revelation chapter 13 and get further info. Okay, so now let's consider Revelation chapter 13. And we know that as we get into Revelation, there's all kind of beasts in there. And we're basically going to just center in on the wild beast that we're going to talk about here in Revelation chapter 13. So let's peer into that. So Revelation chapter 13, notice in verse 1, and it stood still upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a wild beast ascending out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon his horns 10 diadems, and upon his heads blasphemous names. Okay, so basically we see here in Revelation, there was a vision of a wild beast, but this one has 10 horns and 7 heads. All right, what does this symbolize? What does this mean? Well, we can get that understanding if we go to Revelation chapter 17. And notice in verse 9 and 10. And there's a lot of other things that are in Revelation chapter 17. We're not going to go into that today, but we'll break it down later. But in verse 9 and 10, it says, here is where the intelligence that has wisdom comes in. The 7 heads mean 7 mountains, where the woman sits on top, and there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet arrived, but when he does arrive, he must remain a short while. All right, the 7 kings are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then what do you think is the last one? The Anglo-American. Yes, there were more than 7 kings throughout time, 7 kingdoms, but these were the kingdoms that were in relation to the Most High's people. That's what makes these the 7 world powers in relation to the Most High's people in Israel. My book covers more information about that, and so we'll see you next time, friends, on another